Hello, listeners, and welcome. You're listening to the Crime Tales from Travels podcast, the show where we highlight crimes from cities that we have traveled to or just passed through, perhaps on a road trip. I'm your host, Kimberly Rotet, and sometimes I'm joined by my spouse, Dadiela Rodriguez. Before we dive in, though, we want to thank you for tuning in. This is our second podcast. We do have another podcast, Productions, and let's just address that real quick if we can. It is really kind of simple. Our interests are vast. With that other podcast, Productions, we also have a YouTube channel where we focus on living life outside of the work that we do. But part of that enjoyment of living life outside of the work that we do and finding enjoyment is listening to podcasts of varying kinds, whether it be true crime or just other general podcasts or really good books on audiobook, things that we can listen to and talk about. Because if you haven't caught that other channel or podcast, then you might not know that both my spouse and I, we do both still work our day jobs, and they happen to be 3.5 hours apart, Monday through Friday. This means somebody's traveling every weekend, so you can imagine that finding something that we both like listening to be able to listen to it either on our drive or just throughout the week as we're getting through our Monday through Friday, and then talking about it together, it really helps kind of keep a lot of interesting conversation going when we can find things that we both like to listen to and then talk about. And that's one of the reasons that we also then wanted to delve into this particular type of genre of podcast. And the other reason is, you know, we had conversations with each other when we were living in other states, and sometimes ideas are born from conversations like, do you remember when we lived in Ohio and we thought that there was something creepy about that dense forest near our town that we both traveled, through or drove through or around when we were driving to and from work? We would literally, kind of look at that wooded area and think, gosh, I wonder what type of nefarious activity could happen there. Or think about this too. How many times have we stopped at a gas station and just kind of got a creepy vibe from the area? Even now, today, somebody's always driving every weekend. We always try to gas up and fill up with anything that we might need before the drive. Not that we don't want to stop in these small towns and give them some patronage. It's not necessarily about that. It's just, it's dark. It's very desolate. And we don't know anyone there. If anything were to happen, we would still be a few hours away from help. But even the other question of how often in the past have you stopped at the rest stop on the road trip because you just didn't think you could wait until the next town to use the restroom, so you stopped to use the facilities. And maybe the rest stop was kind of creepy. Or even this, we've taken trips, plenty of trips, whether for pleasure or for work, and we find ourselves in a new city with fun things to do in the midst of being touristy, or maybe even we're trying to blend in and integrate with the locals just so that you don't stand out, but you just kind of come across some of these places that just bring a sense of unease. You get the idea, though. It's likely that we've all experienced something like that. And with that in mind, we wanted to delve into this particular genre. So we're happy that you're here. This is our first episode of this particular podcast, Crime Tales from Travels, and we hope you enjoy it. Also, before we dive into today's story, don't forget to subscribe. You can find us on Instagram, Crime Tales from Travels. We are leaving our show notes on the main website. It's kroadproductions.net. And the first up on our Crime Tales from Travels podcast is the tale from the Sirloin Stockade Murders in Oklahoma City. You might be asking yourself, why Oklahoma City? But recall the premise of this podcast. We are telling crime tales from stories or cities or places that we have traveled to or from or passed through. We recently took a pretty great road trip from San Antonio to one of those Lake Michigan beach towns. We were visiting some of my family, and we stopped for an overnight in Oklahoma City. And we'd been to Oklahoma City before, so this particular trip wasn't very different. We've been through several times, actually, but we actually stopped. We had dinner at one of the local stops. We actually enjoyed an overnight there at an Airbnb. The next day before we left the city, we got up and we drove around the site of the Oklahoma City bombing and memorial area. So we thought that it definitely qualified as a true legitimate stop on our road trip. So that's why we thought this is as good a place as any to start this podcast series. But the Sirloin Stockade Murders. So we're delving into this, and even 40 plus years later, we want to treat, the names of these individuals that we're going to be reading about with a whole lot of reverence. We want to say that up front. We don't share these stories to kind of bring up or any hurt or pain for anyone, but these were very heinous crimes in this particular situation. Not every crime that we cover is going to be a murder. There could be a slew of others. It could be some white collar crime that happened. It could be some other types of nefarious activity. But we say that up front. When there are victims, we do want to speak about the victims with reverence. But we also can't help but not acknowledge that as we delve into our topic today, we can't help but ask ourselves, does it become sort of a rite of passage when you live in a town or an area where a massive crime has taken place? In this case, a mass murder has taken place. But it's one of those situations where when you grow up in that town, you don't not know about it. And even now, more than 40 years later, it seems for Oklahoma City residents that seems to be the case. People didn't grow up in Oklahoma City without knowing about the Sirloin Stockade Murders. But so these murders occurred, and it was in 1978, and by this time, there had not been a mass murder in Oklahoma history. This was one of the biggest situations to kind of shock the Sooner State. I do want to take a moment, and we want to acknowledge the names of the victims before we delve into the story. 17-year-old David Lindsay, 16-year-old David Salzman, 17-year-old Anthony Tu, 15-year-old Terry Horst, 43-year-old Louis Zacharias, who was a store manager, 56-year-old Isaac Freeman, who was also a store manager. But according to the Oklahoman, when the police arrived on scene, so when authorities arrived on scene, of those 5 victims' names that we read, they found 5 bodies on the floor as they were getting ready to go into the walk-in cooler. And as that emergency personnel arrived, the 2 store managers and the oldest victims, they were laying closest to the door. One of the boys sat slumped in kind of boxes of frozen ground beef. The youngest victim, we recall, was only 15 years old, Terry Horst. She was actually, when she was found, initially still clinging to life. She too, though, unfortunately succumbed to her injuries. And at the end of all of this, at the end of this horrific crime, what was taken along with the lives of these 6 victims? But according to, I think it's KOCO 5 News, it was just over $1,200 that they had taken out of the safe. To put into context, that's today's money would be around $5,700, so just maybe shy of $6,000. So 6 people were murdered for what is the equivalent today of just under $6,000. And what's worse is when they started to process the scene at the Sirloin Stockade in Oklahoma City, initially they had no suspects. But let's see if we can provide some additional context for how everything took place. When doing some reading about this, I actually found several articles, and I'm going to link those in the show notes, as well as one of the videos I saw. It was kind of a little bit of an older video, and I think it was done for one of the anniversary, maybe the 40-year anniversary of the murders. But according to that video, and I think it was the Case Cracked, I think it was called Case Cracked, the Sirloin Stockade Murders. Again, I'll put it in the show notes. But according to that video, the youngest victim, Terry, 15-year-old Terry Horst, her boyfriend was supposed to pick her up that night. He was giving her a ride home from work, and it looks like he was he went in there, he drove to the restaurant, he went inside to get a drink, and then he went back outside to just kind of pass some time until Terry was ready to get out of work. This young man, Terry's boyfriend, I believe his name was Carlos, and at some point, Carlos saw a car in an otherwise deserted parking lot. The car reportedly that he saw was his green Oldsmobile Vista station wagon, I believe. But it just didn't recognize, and there weren't any other cars, and he had picked Terry up before, so he kind of knew some of the cars from some of the employees in the lot. Carlos reportedly re-entered the restaurant, but he didn't see or hear anything. The door was unlocked, though, so it's closing time. There aren't customers in there. There aren't patrons in there, but the door is still unlocked. So he kind of found it probably a little bit odd, right? So Carlos goes back outside. He gets into his car, and it's the 70s, right? So there are these old CB radios in the car. He reportedly cranked the volume up on his radio and said into the CB radio, "This is the police. We have you surrounded." Kind of an interesting thing to do when you really think about it. Using the technology at the time and trying to blare something in, but he clearly, it seems like, he just had this little bit of a creeped out vibe from what was going on. But when he didn't see or hear anything from when he did that with the CB radio, Carlos goes back inside, and this time he's calling out for his girlfriend, Terry. Again, he doesn't hear anything, but he did hear a phone ring and ring and ring, and nobody's picking it up. And at this point, he's getting a whole lot more nervous. He turns to leave the store again, but in doing so, he sees another man walk in, and he learned that the other man ended up being yet a third store manager named Mike. Now, Mike had told Carlos, he said that the other staff had not called him that night with the store receipts info, and he thought that was really kind of odd, so he ended up getting in his car and just coming over to the store. So the two individuals, Mike and Carlos, they're conversing briefly, but Mike ends up going and taking a look for himself, and he walks towards the meat freezer. And apparently when he came back, he was very visibly shaken. It looked like, he said that it looked like that everyone had been stabbed, and he called the Oklahoma City police. Carlos was obviously concerned. I mean, it was his girlfriend who was working here, so he went to go see for himself, and he saw those 6 bodies. We know now that the victims had been shot, not stabbed. We know that after the Oklahoma City police cleared the crime scene of the bodies, that they found the spent bullets from what looked like 2 pistols, indicating to them that it was more than one shooter. As they were investigating, the police thought this crime sounded an awful lot like a previous, very recent crime and murder of the Lorenz family. Eventually, the police were able to link these 2 separate situations, but they still did not have a suspect in mind. And it took several months before they were even going to be able to get to any part of the story, but they got a break in the case because they got an anonymous phone call. So this anonymous phone call, before we jump into that particular situation, we noted that the Oklahoma City police had thought that there was a familiar tone to the Sirloin Stockade murders. We do want to take a quick jump back and address that real quick, because the murders that they thought that this Sirloin Stockade massacre looked like were from the Lorenz family, who were murdered in Purcell, Oklahoma. Now, while not in Oklahoma City, these other murders were directly related, so let's make sure that we loop in these details as well. They were able to link the murders of these 3 additional people by one of the guns. It was 38-year-old Sergeant Melvin Lorenz, 31-year-old Staff Sergeant Linda Lorenz, and their 12-year-old son, Richard Lorenz. The Lorenz family was reportedly traveling from their duty station in San Antonio to North Dakota to attend a funeral. Melvin Lorenz's mother had passed away, and the family was traveling to her funeral. Melvin was an Air Force sergeant, and his wife Linda was a staff sergeant. Reportedly, it was Roger Dale's wife, Verna, who flagged down the Lorenz family while they were on Interstate 35. Verna had been sitting on the side of the interstate with the hood of her car popped up. So when the Lorenz family were headed out to the funeral, they thought they would be good Samaritans and try to help these individuals who were stuck on the side of the road. Verna would later explain in court that when Melvin Lorenz walked over to assist, it was Roger Dale Stafford who hit him with a gun and demanded his wallet. Reportedly, Melvin would not give Roger Dale Stafford his wallet, so Roger Dale shot Melvin Lorenz. Melvin's wife, Linda, tried to run up to Verna in the car, but Verna fought her off, and Roger Dale shot her too. To not leave any witnesses, Roger also killed the couple's son, Richard. So after they shot Richard Lorenz, the Staffords drive the 12-year-old Richard's body about a mile away from where they left her parents before fleeing themselves. Now, this was done on July 16th, 1978. And as a reminder, then, just a few days later was when the Sirloin Stockade murders took place on July 23rd, 1978. So somehow the police were able to link these crimes via the bullet ballistics, and they were able to put together some composite sketches of the suspects in January of 1979. So while investigators were able to link these crimes and eventually put together the composite sketches, according to Murderpedia, for 6 months the investigators followed leads in 5 different states. On January 3rd, in 1979, after the composite sketches had come out, a drunken Roger Dale Stafford made an anonymous call. So recall that anonymous call that we mentioned before, about 6 months after the Sirloin Stockade murders. The police were doing both of this work. They were linking these crime scenes as a part of really the Lorenz murder. They were able to put some composite sketches together, but because the ballistics kind of linked the two, they had to assume then that the composite sketches of the individuals who were involved in the Lorenz murder were also a part of the Sirloin Stockade murders. So on January 3rd of 1979, Roger Dale Stafford, who was reportedly drunk, made this call to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. He said he was a trucker who partied with the murderers and provided the names of Verna and Harold Stafford. So Verna was Roger Dale Stafford's wife, and Harold Stafford was Roger Dale's brother. So he was saying that he was a trucker, not really involved, but then giving the names of both his brother and his wife. And according to the Oklahoman, Fred Collins, who was a bookkeeper at the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations at the time, he was the one who reportedly took the anonymous phone call from Roger Dale Stafford. He said the call came in, and he tried to speak with an English accent, and he provided the names of Verna and Harold Stafford. Collins recalled speaking to the caller twice that morning, thinking that, gosh, he provided more details than what the public knew, so Collins thought he has to be involved somehow. As a result of that call, police learned that Harold Stafford, the brother of Roger Dale Stafford, had actually died in a motorcycle accident about a week after the Sirloin Stockade murders. And eventually, the authorities were really narrowing in on Roger Dale and Verna Stafford. They learned that the anonymous call that Roger Dale had provided came from a payphone in Chicago, so that's where their investigation went. So then in March of 1979, Verna Stafford was located in Chicago. She told them about both the Lorenz family as well as the Sirloin Stockade murders. She disclosed that the other man was Roger Dale Stafford, her husband. She noted that they were not together anymore. Verna was taken to Oklahoma City, where she provided additional statements to the police. She gave information that was so descriptive of the crimes that she had to have been there at the scenes when they occurred, because obviously she was reporting details that the authorities had not yet released. The puzzle pieces were really starting to fall into place. There were two people who were still alive that were responsible for the murders, and one of them had already been found. So the manhunt then really started for Roger Dale. According to the Oklahoman, an OSBI agent, Phil, I think his name was Phil, if I'm saying this correctly, Phil Stinelli, and an OCPD detective, Bill Cook, they traveled multiple states. I think according to that particular site, they traveled to about 7 states, and they interviewed almost 70 people. I think it was 68 people in 4 days, where they were trying to find this physical evidence. Authorities were eventually able to catch up to Roger Dale at a YMCA in Chicago. And when the case went to trial, Roger maintained that he did not commit these crimes. But Verna provided her testimony to the contrary, and it was Verna, his wife's testimony, that actually helped convict Roger Dale. Verna was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder also. Roger Dale faced 6 sentences of death. He was found guilty of all charges, and the jury unanimously approved that the aggravating circumstances giving him 3 additional sentences of death. Roger Dale, one man, was sentenced to die 9 times. Verna tried to appeal her convictions over the years, but each time her convictions were upheld. In 1980, Roger Dale Stafford was placed on death row of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, I believe. And the fight in the appeals court would go on for more than 15 years. His execution would even receive a stay from the Supreme Court in the United States. He got remarried while he was on death row and apparently converted to Judaism while awaiting execution. However, Roger Dale Stafford was eventually executed at 12:30 in the morning on July 1st in 1995. According to the Daily Oklahoman, Rogers' last meal consisted of 2 foot-long chili cheese hot dogs, 2 large milkshakes, and a large order of French fries with ketchup and mustard. Outside of the prison gates, a group of people stood displaying signs expressing their support for Stafford's execution at the time. I happened to read another article about how he continued to proclaim his innocence all the way up till his execution. I think he even sent a gift card to the Sirloin Stockade to one of the prosecutors who was prosecuting the case. with a handwritten note that basically implied that someone innocent was dying as a result of this particular situation. So he was kind of very staunchly proclaiming his innocence all the way up until the day that he died. That is the story, though, of the very quick story of the Sirloin Stockade Murders, and it was a doozy of a one for us to start our podcast. But if you recall the premise of the podcast, we want to tell stories from places that we've traveled, visited, or even just passed through. That being in mind, we did obviously start with a murder case because we happen to choose Oklahoma City. We do want to work kind of hard to sprinkle in other types of crimes as well, so it's not just murder all the time. But we happen to find this particular case, and it was relatively old, but it was one of those quintessential cases that seems that it really is sort of a rite of passage for people growing up in the area to, if you grow up there, you didn't not know about this particular case. And you can only imagine, kind of the history of the case on that town and the continued, pain that the family of the victims probably feel. Again, we don't tell these stories or retell these stories to try to be mean or rude to anyone, and we try to speak with reverence towards the family. But we do want to sometimes retell some of these stories that maybe not everyone outside of that particular city has heard about. So not every case will be a murder case. We will definitely sprinkle in some other crimes. But the premise being, we always want to try to look for crime stories to be told from the places that we've traveled. For more information, you can find us on Instagram, Crime Tales from Travels. You can also look for the show notes on the it's caro.productions.net. An additional recording of our podcasts and other collections of videos will be found on our caro.productions YouTube page. Until next time, thank you for joining us.